Thank you for joining us today for East Bay Housing Organization's What's on the Ballot webinar. East Bay Housing Organizations, or EBHO, is a member-driven organization working to preserve, protect, and create affordable housing opportunities for low-income communities in the East Bay by educating, advocating, organizing, and building coalitions. I'm EBHO's lead organizer, Dolores Tejada, and in just 1 minute, I will toss it over to our moderator for today, Policy Director Jeff Levin. But before I do that, I'd like to introduce the rest of our staff who will wave at the camera when I say their name. Executive Director Gloria Bruce, Policy Director Sophia DeWitt, Memberships and Operations Director Kiki Poe, Communications Manager Grover Weeman Brown, Census and Campaign Organizer Damion Scott, Policy Associate Alex Worth, and an enthusiastic welcome to our new Faith and Justice Organizer Ronnie Boyd, who's having her first day today. Last, this webinar is a first in a series of events centered on voter education that we are doing in September. We have 2 candidate forums that will host candidates from each of the 5 Oakland City Council seats on the ballot. The first, on September 17th, will host candidates from Districts 1 and 3. The second, on September 24th, will host candidates from Districts 5, 7, and the at-large seat. These forums will specifically focus on housing and homelessness, and we invite you to join us. Additionally, our Action Friday for this month will focus on Alameda City's Measure Z and will take place on September 18th. You can find more on all of these events on our website, ebho.org, and the link is being placed in the chat box for you now. Now let's get to the good stuff. Jeff, take it away. Jeff, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Good morning, everybody. Great to see so many people here and so much interest in this election, terribly important election. I wanted to take a minute to do a run through of how we have structured things today. We have broken up our presentation into segments so that we can have question and answer periods as well. We are going to start with an overview of 3 state propositions. And then have a short question and answer period. Then we will talk about 2 county measures, again, question and answer, 2 city measures. We will then wrap up with a presentation on voting, how to register and how to vote, particularly with all the questions that have come up around that this year. I just want to note to ask questions of the participants, please enter your questions in the chat window. If you're not familiar with Zoom, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, if you move your mouse down there, you should see an icon for chat. You click on that, and then you can enter your questions, and we will take them as we go. So with that, why don't we get started with presentation on state measures. Our presenters for this will be Alyssa Dennis, Executive Director of Community Economics, Damion Scott, Census and Campaign Organizer with EBHO, Dolores Tejada, Lead Organizer with EBHO, and Francisco Duenas, Executive Director with Housing Now. So let me turn it over to Alyssa.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I think I'm unmuted, and I think I can see your slides. That's great. So good morning, everybody, and thanks for attending. I'm going to talk about Prop 15, Schools and Communities First. It's an initiative that I and many other folks in the affordable housing world have been working on for probably pretty close to a decade, so we're excited to finally get it on the ballot. It's 40 years since 1978 when we had Prop 13, and I noticed from the list in the chat that maybe there were 2 or 3 of you who were voting by then, not very many of you. But in 1978, just really briefly, the 70s were kind of this time of rapid inflation in the economy. And there was this, what was going on at the time was that people were noticing that their houses and their properties were increasing in value, and suddenly their taxes were increasing, even though they weren't getting anything out of it unless they wanted to move and sell their house. And so there was this anti-tax group led by a guy named Howard Jarvis, who you might have heard about, who put together this initiative to say, let's slash property taxes for everybody. And one group that they significantly got on board with them was the Residential Apartment Owners Association, who wanted to reduce their taxes. And they told people they were going to reduce their rents. Well, of course, that didn't really happen, come to pass. But at any rate, they passed this measure, Prop 13, which folks have probably heard about. It's been around for over 40 years. And what it did was it said, okay, we're going to cap your assessed value of your property at 1% of the value of the property. We're going to make the tax, we're going to make the tax only be able to increase at 2% per year. It can't increase. And the only time that it can actually increase more significantly to the actual assessed value of the property would be upon sale. So if somebody's living in their property or running a commercial property, which we're going to talk a lot more about, that the tax rate could only, that tax amount could only increase 2% a year. And the whole idea was, keep grandma in her house, right? But what a lot of folks didn't realize was, so first of all, as soon as it passed in 1978, the following year, the property tax revenues that the state received dropped by more than half. So California was doing really well in the 70s. They had a really great school system. They had a really great infrastructure. They had really great highways and roads. Well, all of that was just slashed in 1979 when property tax revenues were cut in half. What a lot of people don't realize, so Prop 13 has been, as folks are aware, the sort of third rail is kind of the terminology, the third rail of California top politics. No one wants to touch it because it's such a ingrained in people's head that it's all about keeping grandma in her house. What a lot of people don't realize is that it not only applied to residential property and grandma, but it also applied to commercial property. And so commercial property, which is typically owned not by you or me or an individual, but by corporations and LLCs and partnerships and all kinds of goofy ownership structures, those properties typically don't really ever get sold and therefore don't ever really get reassessed. So in residential property, if you sell me your house, that's very clear. It changed hands. The new value that I paid for it is what your property taxes are going to be calculated on. Whereas commercial property, if somebody sells 21% of their share, nothing happens. It's not a sale. So a lot of commercial properties are still taxed at rates that have only marginally increased since 1978. So what that's created is that those budget shortfalls for local governments and for schools. So property taxes benefit the school system, the K through 12 and the community colleges, as well as cities and counties and all the other little small taxing entities.
1 minute.
Okay, so what Prop 15 does is it says commercial properties only that that people don't even realize are included in this are going to get changed around. Instead of continuing on the Prop 13 formula, commercial properties only would get reassessed every couple of years based on their actual market value. So it dramatically would increase $12 billion a year statewide is the amount of money that's been estimated to be and been verified by Legislative Analyst's Office to be generated by this measure when it passes. It has benefits. It has sort of mitigation measures so that it protects small businesses. You're only impacted if your property is worth more than $3 million, which doesn't, and you also have a relief from a personal property tax for small businesses. So it doesn't affect them. Not more than 90% of the revenues that are going to come in are coming from less than 10% of commercial properties. So it's really only the big guys with commercial properties that haven't been reassessed in decades that are going to be hit by this measure. So $12 billion a year, commercial properties only. Yes, on Prop 15. And then I'm supposed to tell you, so two quick things. One is if you want to endorse the measure, either as an individual, as an organization, you can go to the website, which is yes15, just yes15.org. Please go and endorse and donate. And Damion is going to tell you some additional ways that you can plug into this effort. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, for that explanation on Prop 15. And yes, I'm here to tell how you can get involved in supporting Prop 15 and its passage. So EBHO is partnering with Pico, California to conduct phone banking in support of Prop 15. That's going to be starting next week. And to help ensure funding for our schools and communities first, we want you to join in our efforts and join in our phone banking. So to get involved, you can email me. My email is damion@ebho.org, which should be in the chat sometime later. And also, you can visit the website that's on the screen that you're seeing now, and you can sign up to help, support our schools and communities. And now Dolores is going to explain Prop 16 for us.
Thank you, Damion. So in 1996, Proposition 209 banned government agencies and public entities in California from using preferential treatment or discriminating against anyone based on gender or race. However, this resulted in institutions being unable to use affirmative action, which is a policy where race, gender, religion, or national origin are taken into account to increase opportunities for those from historically marginalized and disenfranchised classes, effectively reinforcing barriers that exist to keep out women and people of color. On our ballot now is Prop 16. So this would be a constitutional amendment to repeal Prop 209 and allow agencies to lawfully have affirmative action policies again. A yes on Prop 16 would restore the ability for public agencies to consider race and gender in decisions about public education, employment, and contracting. Prop 16 has universal support, including support from ACE and the ACLU, as well as activists Dolores and Bernice King. We strongly support and ask you to vote for yes on Prop 16. A yes vote is a step towards racial, gender, and economic justice. Thank you. And I am now going to pass it over to Francisco.
Thank you, Dolores. Appreciate it. Can folks hear me okay? I'm just double checking that I can be heard.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you to EBHO and for this opportunity to talk about Prop 21. As you might hear as a running theme about all of these state propositions, a lot of times we start with a previous law or a previous proposition that was passed long ago and that is still affecting us today. And Prop 21 is also one of those, falls in that same theme. To understand Prop 21, you have to go back to 1995 and know about or learn about the Costa-Hawkins Act, which is a state law that took many, many years to pass. It got introduced every year after, and it kept failing after every year until it finally passed with one vote. And what this state law did in 1995, it basically said that if you were a local city and you had rent control, that rent control ordinance was limited in certain ways. So it basically is a state law that limits how local cities can try and regulate the rents that are in their communities. And maybe you folks probably heard 2 years ago this same issue. We had on the ballot Prop 10. I think that was the ballot initiative. It's 2 years, but it feels like light years now. And what that initiative tried to do was completely repeal Costa-Hawkins, really get rid of this state law and not allow for any, state control or, limitations on what local cities can do with their rent control laws. I worked on that campaign, and even though we did not ultimately pass that proposition, I will say that we did move the dial a lot on people just even knowing that this state law existed, knowing how their affordability of their housing is really dictated by this state law. And so what Prop 21 really does, it builds on what we started with Prop 10 and that education. And it doesn't completely repeal the Costa-Hawkins Act at the state level, but it amends it. So it loosens the limitations that the state is trying to impose on local jurisdictions. So it does this in 3 different ways. So one of the ways that currently cities cannot, they can't pass any rent control for buildings that were built after 1995, which is when the law got passed. And if you already had rent control when the law got passed, well, then they said you can't have rent control on any building that was built when your rent control ordinance was put in place. And so that means that in cities like Los Angeles and Oakland and San Francisco, there are buildings that were built after 1978, after 1979, or in the early
1 minute,
80s
Francisco.
that are not covered, thank you, Jeff, that are not covered by rent control. And Prop 21 would allow the local rent control ordinance to cover buildings that are 15 years or older. So it definitely allows for more properties to be included under the rent control. Another current limitation is that rent control cannot be applied to single-family homes. With Prop 21, that would allow us to do that, and landlords that only own 1 or 2 units, they would be exempted, so they wouldn't be covered by rent control. They wouldn't be covered by rent control at the local level. And the final thing that Prop 21 allows us to do is that when a renter moves out, it would provide some ability for the city to cap the rental increase on the next tenant. So the way I think about this is sort of rent control for the community, not just for the tenant that is currently in there. And it would allow for a 15% increase over 3 years on that vacant unit, but not, complete, currently we have no limitation when a tenant leaves on the next tenant. So this would allow for some continued opportunity to provide rent control. And it doesn't create any new rent control, so your local
If you can
cities
please wrap up, Francisco.
will do, Jeff. The local cities will still have to pass or expand their rent controls, but it will allow that expansion going forward. And on the website, on the slide you see, please check out yeson21ca.org to endorse Prop 21, and we really think it's important. So thank you for having me. Pass it back to Jeff.
Great. Thanks to all 3 of our presenters. And again, that's vote yes on Prop 15, Prop 16, and Prop 21. We will take questions now. Just a reminder, if you have questions, you can post them in the chat box. And as we're going forward with the presentations, if a question occurs to you, go ahead and post it. We have folks who are monitoring those, and we'll keep track of all of the questions. We have a question on Prop 15. The Montclarian had an editorial opposing Prop 15, and one of the claims that they made was that the shift in the property tax burden since Prop 13 from commercial to residential property is not because commercial is not paying its fair share, but just because there's been an increase in residential property in the state. Alyssa, can you respond to this?
Yeah, I maybe Kathy can explain more about what their point was, because we're not just saying that residential percentage, that the residential percentage of what's collected has increased, although that's true. But the fact remains that because these large properties in particular have not been reassessed over the years, there's an estimated $12 billion a year that could be collected if those properties were assessed regularly. So I think it's more about the absolute dollar number of what's being left on the table by not reassessing the commercial property. It's not just about a percentage. So I don't know, Kathy, can Kathy get muted or if anyone else read the editorial. I didn't read it.
Okay.
I mean, I'll try to find it and read the editorial and see if I can understand any more about it. But it just seems like it's kind of an unrelated, tangential point to what we're talking about.
Any other
If you
questions?
give me 1 second, I can find Kath. Oh, I don't see Kathy's name on the participant list
Oh, maybe she left.
anymore. Yeah. Thank you for addressing that, though. And I also want to reiterate that for Prop 15, Prop 16, and Prop 21, we are asking for yes votes.
And wait just one more minute to see if anybody else has any questions on any of those 3 state propositions.
I could also just quickly say I noticed that the East Bay Times had a no on Prop 15 editorial, and they ironically were saying, well, it's not fair to commercial if you don't also tie in residential, which is kind of our whole point in going after just commercial is that, like, residential is totally the third rail, no one would touch it. So it's kind of ironic that their editorial is like, oh, well, this is unfair to do just commercial and not residential.
I have a question for Francisco to expand on yes on 21. So am I understanding correctly that it would, can you in one sentence, define again what a yes vote on Prop 21 means?
Yes, yes vote on Prop 21 would allow local cities to be able to expand the units that are covered by their local rent control laws.
Thank you.
And I will just add to that, after Prop 21 passes, and we are very hopeful that it will, we will all have to be very busy working to strengthen existing rent control laws in different cities. Prop 21 simply allows those changes to be made, as well as trying to pass new rent laws in cities that currently don't have rent control. So this is the first step. It allows us to organize and fight for stronger tenant protections around the state.
And can I just add kind of to that point about this Prop 21 being the first step rather than the last step? That really is also true around Prop 15. Prop 15 is going to generate all this additional revenues, but then it's up to us to say we need to get those revenues to go to affordable housing. So it's really like, similarly, it's like it's creating an opportunity for organizing. It's not giving us any automatic money that goes to housing or healthcare or social services or whatever. It's saying, hey, you can organize, there's money out there. That's when you can organize, is when there's something to be gotten. And we'll have something to get to do that after Prop 15 passes.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. So we will move on to our next segment, which is county measures. And again, just a reminder to folks, if you have a question at any time, go ahead and plug it into the chat box. We have folks who are tracking those, and we'll make sure that the questions get asked after the presenters are done. So we're going to move on now to a couple of county measures. We have 2 presenters for this. Mariana Moore is the Executive Director of Ensuring Opportunity Campaign to End Poverty in Contra Costa County, and she'll be talking about Contra Costa Measure X. And then we will hear from Gloria Bruce, Executive Director of EBHO, talking about Alameda County Measure W. And with that, let's turn it over to Mariana.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. So glad to be in this conversation with you around the importance of housing and supporting it at every level of government, and, go vote, yay. So I want to talk to you about Measure X. It's a campaign for a healthy and safe Contra Costa. I want to tell you what it is and then why it matters and then how you can get involved. So Measure X is a half-cent sales tax that would be in effect for 20 years. It would generate estimated $81 million a year. Of course, that amount would vary, being a sales tax, on how the economy is doing and what folks are buying and how much, but roughly $80 million a year, which in a county like Contra Costa is an enormous influx of funds. Of course, we also want those Prop 15 funds. It's a countywide tax, so it applies to every sale in the county. It does not apply, however, to food and medicine. It's a general tax, which means that the measure cannot specify exactly what the funds are invested in. However, we are in the process of putting together legislation to create an oversight committee that would have deep community representation, that would provide an annual needs assessment and recommendations to the Board of Supervisors on what are the needs in the county to then guide the board in their annual budget making. And the campaign team that has come together is very broad and diverse. It's labor and community organizations and residents. There's folks actually speaking at our kickoff event that's happening literally right now that are working with young kids, that help elders, that are hospital workers. It's a very, very diverse coalition that are working on getting us across the finish line on November 3rd. So that's what it is. Why it matters. Low-income residents in our county have struggled for years. Contra Costa is one of the very few counties in the region that does not have a dedicated sales tax. As you know, Alameda County, for example, has Measure A. So this would be really a game changer. Every year, we all come to the budget hearings and say, we need more safety net programs, we need more housing, we need more healthcare options, we need mental health. And the Board of Supervisors says our hands are tied. Most of our money comes from the state and federal government. We really don't have any flexible revenue. So this measure aims to fix that. In terms of housing and why it matters there's been not enough affordable housing built in Contra Costa. We were just at a Board of Supervisors meeting yesterday talking about the need for more legal aid for tenants that are at risk of being evicted during and after this pandemic. And the board is like, we might be able to scrape together 300,000. Well, we need a lot more than that. And that's just one example of an issue right now that's affecting tenants and residents that we really need to get more revenue behind services and supports for folks in our community that are most vulnerable. And it would be, again, an ongoing flexible funding source that all of us in the community, including housing advocates, could, of course, come before the board and make the case every year for how those funds should be invested. The impact if it's not passed, our county hospital has a structural budget deficit of millions of dollars and is actually at risk of closing. If this measure doesn't pass, that's not an overstatement. The county's just been limping along, even during a formerly robust economy, because structurally we just need more revenue. And again, we're so behind in building housing and preserving affordable housing and helping protect tenants. I think right now, especially with the risk of evictions, we really need to put every dollar we can into protecting tenants and residents and essential workers and those who are struggling the most. How to learn more about this campaign and how to get involved. The website is healthyandsafecontracosta.com, which is there on the on the screen here. And then actually I also wanted to mention that on October 14th and October 15th in English and then in Spanish respectively, Ensuring Opportunity and several partners, including EBHO, are going to be putting on a couple of voter education events, similar to this, but including some additional state measures. It's free, open to the public, and I will be sure to send information to EBHO to get out to all of you. So we're really trying to get the word out to the community about this measure, as well as really important other state measures in particular that help our communities thrive. And thanks, happy to answer questions. Oh, and right now I'm happy to introduce Gloria Bruce, the Executive Director of EBHO, and she's going to talk about Measure W, the Alameda County Home Together Initiative.
Thank you so much, Mariana. You've been such a great partner in all of this. And of course, my child is stomping on the floor at the exact moment that I'm starting to present. So my apologies, and maybe my tech support here at home can close the door for me. Anyway, I am here to talk about Measure W, Alameda County Home Together, but let me step back for 1 second and just remind, as folks have said already today, the theme of today's ballot measures that we are talking to you about is yes. This is a vote yes education session. If you take nothing else away just from this, remember these names of these measures and vote yes on these. Your yes matters. As we're all staring out at an orange sky and knowing that there are people intense underneath that orange sky and feeling the weight of that and wondering what we can do. What we can do is vote. And one of the things that we really want you to vote on, this is one of our priority measures like Prop 15, Schools and Communities First, is Measure W, Alameda County Home Together. I believe in this measure. We believe in this measure. You will see my name on the ballot measure argument statement. I signed onto it. I'm on the steering committee. We've been working on this for a really long time because we believe at EBHO, if you can act, you have to. And this is, as we all know, this is one of the most pressing issues before the pandemic hit, and even more so now, is getting and keeping people housed. What this ballot measure will do is provide funding to protect and house our most vulnerable neighbors. Now, EBHO has a great track record of working on these yes measures. We pushed for yes on Measure A1 in 2016. Many of you were with us for that. Yes on Props 1 and 2 in 2018, and we got a lot of revenue to build affordable housing. And I'm proud to say that Alameda County, in the 4 years since Measure A1 was passed, which we helped to bring about, has built over 3,200 new homes for Alameda County residents. That's a scale that matters. Not enough, but a scale that matters. And over 1,000 of those are designated for formerly homeless people. But it's not enough because we need the support and the subsidy to keep those people in those homes and get other people into housing. So Home Together will bring through a needs assessment that was done with many people across the county, through a strategic plan that was done by Everyone Home, our county homelessness initiative that I'm on the board of. They did a really great needs assessment and report with a racial equity lens to say, what are the solutions that we actually need that we know will work? Yes, we do need sanitation services, but more than that, we need routes to housing, we need routes to employment, we need housing subsidies and supports. So this measure is going to do that if it passes, and it has to pass. It is a sales tax, but we feel like the benefits are going to accrue to the low-income people and Black and communities of color in Alameda County who need it most. And we're hoping that even in this economy, it will raise up to $150 million a year. Now, this is not a special tax. It is a general tax. It does go to the county general fund, but the supervisors voted to put this on the ballot, and they also voted to adopt the Home Together plan, which has a pretty detailed list of strategies and expenditures that this can go to. And we are going to push hard to make sure that that is where this money goes. There's so many needs in the county. Let's not cannibalize all the different services that our county needs, from health to human services to education to transportation. Let's win this ballot measure to bring in money to get and keep people housed. How can you do that? Well, you can go to Home Together 2020, which I know is in the chat. And the other thing I want to emphasize again, theme number 1, yes on all these things we're telling you about. Theme number 2, vote your whole ballot and tell everybody else to do that, because what we find on things like this, you know what your California ballot looks like. It's pages long. You have to vote the whole thing, and sometimes people just give up. Don't do that, because these local measures that affect your community are further down the ballot, and the people who are most likely to vote yes on these progressive measures are the ones who are also most likely to drop off. So please vote down that whole ballot and tell everybody to do so. Go to this website that's right here to donate or endorse like Prop 15. We are still happy to have individual and organizational and public sector endorsements, and you can get information from me, and you can phone bank. I'm signed up to phone bank on Saturday, September 26th. There are 9 slots left on that morning. Join me for that. We can all be doing it in our separate homes, knowing we're phone banking together, and I can get you more information on how to sign up if that time doesn't work for you. But I'd love to see you visit that website, add your endorsement, contact me, come phone bank with me on September 26th. That's all I've got to say. Yes on Measure W. And now I'm passing it back to Jess.
Great. Thank you to both of you for those excellent presentations. Let's go to some questions. I know we have a couple. The first question is for Mariana. Will the money from Measure X be able to be assigned to individual cities and not just the county, or is this sales tax only going to be spent by the county on county services?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the money will go to the county alone. However, especially around housing issues and particularly around homelessness, as you know, the counties and cities work very closely together. And so I expect that cities will be continuing to work with the county to make their needs met around housing, around the unsheltered, and around the other needs that lend themselves to a city and county partnership. So that's the most direct answer to that question, yeah.
Great, thank you. I have a question that actually applies to both of you. So let me ask this, and let's again start with Mariana and then Gloria, who I think touched on this. Measures X and W are both general fund sales taxes, which general taxes, which means they only need a majority vote to pass, but it also means they can't be specifically earmarked as part of the measure. So how do we ensure that measures X and W will in fact include spending for housing and homelessness and not go to other purposes? And let's start with Mariana.
Yeah, that's also a very good question. So I will be honest and say that we would prefer that this be a special tax, which requires a 2/3 majority to pass. That is the high dream, because you get to specify exactly how those funds are spent, and there's a lot more control. However, in Contra Costa, as in many suburban counties, there's just not quite the political support for a 2/3 measure. It's been tried in the past and has failed repeatedly. We did a lot of polling of our community and of voters. We did 2 polls this spring and summer, and both of them showed, I'm happy to say, very strong support, well over the 50% mark required for a general sales tax. We're very confident it's going to pass, but yes, please everyone get out and vote yes. We did not see enough support to do a special tax. So then to get to your direct question, the way that so then we have to work with the reality that we're in, that we don't get to say, spend X dollars on this and Y dollars on that. What we're doing instead is, as similar to what Gloria mentioned, we also conducted a countywide needs assessment. A working group of labor and community partners and residents came together and spent many months actually documenting data and collecting stories and information about what are the greatest community needs. We put that into a needs assessment, which I can drop a link in the chat in a little bit, that then was presented formally to the Board of Supervisors. And the reason is both to inform the entire community of what is needed and build consensus around that, and also, to be frank, to start to put some positive pressure on the Board of Supervisors to understand how the community wants those dollars to be invested. And I mentioned briefly earlier in my presentation about an oversight body. So that's the other sort of strategy and sort of check we're putting in place in terms of a both strategic and sort of annual formal way to do annual needs assessments, look at what the data is saying, formally present that information to the Board of Supervisors from this very diverse and representative oversight body. Again, the community coming together to say, this is what our community is saying collectively that we need. Here's how we want you to invest. And the last thing I'd say is it's really important to be politically organized. When you have a general sales tax measure, it is always legally possible for the Board of Supervisors to run off and do something the community doesn't want. That's not politically wise. But the more that they hear from the community, the more that they pay attention and feel compelled from just a political survival point of view, not also hopefully a moral point of view, to really invest in the things that the community is asking for. I would say that in our needs assessment that we conducted this spring and summer, a real theme came through from the many, many people involved in those conversations and reaching out into communities, is that folks are less interested in investing in law enforcement as traditionally defined. They want to reimagine public safety. They want to make sure that public health is available. They want to make sure that safety net programs are preserved and expanded. They want to see more housing. Housing is an important issue throughout all 5 of the supervisorial districts. So we do have a real strong sense of what folks want to see and what they want the county to invest in. And it's really incumbent upon all of us to continue being powerfully engaged and collectively organized to continue to convey that to the Board of Supervisors, that this is what we as a community want and need.
Great, thank you. And Gloria, I know you touched on this a little bit. Can you also respond to the issue of a general tax and how we make sure that these funds in Alameda County will in fact go to dealing with homelessness? I believe you are on mute.
I think Mariana gave a very comprehensive answer, and it's very similar for Alameda County. I think the only thing I would add is that we do have supervisors in Alameda County who have expressed repeatedly their support for spending money on housing and homelessness. We have Supervisor Wilnut Chan, who's been a champion of this idea, this measure for years. This has been in the works for several years and is still polling very well, even post-pandemic. But as Mariana said, as with Measure W, this was going to be a 2/3 special tax. The latest polling in April, while much better than we thought, still was just too borderline. And we were like, well, do we want to go with the special tax, or do we want to make sure that we can win and get this revenue in? And for me, I mean, the skepticism is warranted. We've seen, someone pointed out in the chat, we've seen instances like the soda tax where things have gone to different measures. But I got to just be real, just speaking from the heart right now. Our public coffers they are getting squeezed so hard. The number of needs for infrastructure, for support, for services, it is so huge. And to me, the consequence of letting our cynicism say we're not going to do something, we're not going to invest, we're not going to bring in more revenue, I think that would just be tragic. And so it's on all of us, and I know that's a lot of work, to agitate and say, the voters said this is what this is for, there's oversight, let's do this. But there are also a lot of good needs in the county. You know, there is a concern that this would, go someplace like to the sheriff, and we can't let that happen. We won't let that happen. And we will say, the county needs revenue, our people, not the county, our people need revenue, our people need to get housed. We will trust and we will fight, and we will pass this and make sure it's passed for what it needs to be used for.
Great, thank you. We do have another question, again, for both of you. Are these sales taxes permanent sales taxes, or do they have a sunset date? And let's start with Gloria, and then we'll come back to Mariana.
There is a sunset date. I am so sorry that I don't have that at my fingertips as I really, really should. I believe it's 20 years, but please don't quote me on that. I am happy to get back to you on that information.
Thank you. Mariana?
Yes, and for Measure X and Contra Costa, it is definitely 20 years sunset.
Great.
Oh, great. And Janie's and actually Janie from St. Mary's Center, good information because they are a major supporter of measures, 10 years. Thank you, Janie.
I'm also not exactly sure, but 10 I see is right.
Well, we will get back and let people know, but we believe it's 10 years for Alameda. I am not seeing any more questions, but let me just allow just a second in case anybody else has any further questions on either of these two county measures.
I want to make sure I understand the question from Ms. Bodden. How come it takes so long? Is that a question? Yeah. I'm wondering if there's some confusion when we were talking about the length of time. What we mean by 10 years or 20 years is that's how long. Thank you. Okay, got it, Irma. What we're saying is that's not how long it will take for the money to come out. We're saying that's how long this new sales tax, this slight sales tax increase will be in effect. It's a 1/2 cent sales tax increase. So it's 1/2 of 1 penny on a dollar that you spend. And then 10 years or 20 years in the case of Contra Costa is how long that will be in effect. And I just want to give one more quick plug on that website we sent out. There's a 9-page plan that details pretty specifically the strategies that have been in the works for several years. And the supervisors did officially adopt that plan as strategies they wanted to pursue with this revenue. So we have to hold them to that.
And just as a clarifying question for both, I'm not sure if I caught this, but it's worth repeating, that ties into Ms. Bowden's question. Both of these measures go into effect 2021, January?
Yes, that's correct.
Thanks.
Great. Well, thanks again to both our presenters, and we are going to move on now to a discussion of local measures. We have 2 presenters for this section. We have Leah Simon-Welsberg, Vice Chair of the Berkeley Rent Board, and Sophia DeWitt, Program Director with EBHO. So let us start with Leah.
Good, I guess almost good afternoon. Really honored to be asked to speak with you and very impressed with all of this. Thank you so much, EBHO, for playing this such key role in educating all of us. So Berkeley for the last couple of years has been kind of every 2 years trying to update and strengthen our ordinance. Just for folks to know that in Berkeley, all of our rent control and just cause for eviction must go through the ballot. Our council can't do it. So that's one of the reasons that things in other cities we could just do through council we're doing. So, but these things, and in some ways these are not dramatic changes. In many ways, it's a little bit of cleanup. The first being, for example, we have a moratorium as Oakland does and as the whole county of Alameda does, saying that there is an eviction moratorium, that you cannot be evicted basically for any purpose other than Ellis evictions, but you specifically cannot be evicted for accrued rent during the state of emergency if it was reasons related to COVID-19. Because it needs, all of our protections need to be in the ballot, we want to make sure that that people will continue to have those protections. And so we have put it into our ballot or into our ordinance so that their landlords can't make the argument that once the moratorium is over, that somehow the protection disappears. But also, unfortunately, as those of you who look out the window and see that we have we're living on dune, that unfortunately, while hopefully someday COVID will be over, we still face other, natural disasters, and obviously the wildfires remind us of that. So that in Berkeley, we'll be able to act very quickly, and it'll already be in our ordinance, and we'll, if we have to do future eviction moratoriums. The second piece is really about us ensuring that, first off, we're able to get information from all of the properties in Berkeley that are not covered by rent control, because our just cause in Berkeley covers every single unit, with the exception, with two small exceptions. And we have a lot of new construction, and we want to make sure that the tenants living in there are able to receive services such as tenant counseling, mediation. And most importantly, we want to make sure that those landlords are also providing us with the same data that help us enforce the protections like the tenant protection ordinance and the, making sure that people are not being illegally evicted, but also really able to make sure that the housing policies that we're implementing are working. So for example, many people say that by building all of this new construction, that somehow that's lowering our rents. We want to know what the rents really are, how many are vacant, and things like that. And so this allows us to receive all of that data. And so finally, we'll be able to say, what is the difference between, what are the rents in a non-rent controlled unit versus a rent controlled unit. We only have half of that data now. The third part is classic cleanup. We passed an ordinance 2 years ago, and a small part of it that most people didn't realize was that it allowed ADUs, tenants living in ADUs that are not exempt because of new construction, exemptions from rent control, but if it's owner occupied, that and the landlord can live in either one. I'm not very happy that we did this. I didn't support it, but it was part of the decision making, the ability to get the other things we did want, which in Berkeley, we changed the definition of new construction. So, but in exchange, in any event, we said that if you build a second ADU, that those tenants will not have just cause protections. That's already in our law. Unfortunately, the state passed a new law that is allowing anybody and everybody to build whatever they want in extra areas. And so we have situations where we have 4 and 5 unit buildings that have been under rent control for 40 years. But the way our ordinance is written is, and then in connection with the state law, all those 4 units that have been rent controlled for 50 years will lose their rent control. So we are doing this to ensure that people who have rent control now will continue to have rent control. So that's it, and hope you can support it. And just reminding you to vote MM, just like we all love to eat chocolate M&Ms, we all love rent protections, and vote yes on M&M. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Leah. And we will turn now to Sophia DeWitt, who will talk about Alameda Measure Z.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad that you all can join us this morning. And I'm here to talk about Alameda Measure Z. Hopefully this will work. My internet connection is a little unstable, so I've been off video, but I'd like to be able to see you as I discuss this, or I'd like you to be able to see me. I'm here to talk about Alameda Measure Z, which repeals Article 26 in the city charter of the city of Alameda, otherwise known as Measure A. Measure A was passed by Alameda voters in 1973 and is a provision in the city charter that bans development of multifamily and affordable housing on the island, making housing unaffordable for many people. The city and affordable housing developers, since the passage of Measure A, have found ways to kind of work around the edges to develop some affordable housing on the island with an affordable housing overlay zone and some other workarounds, but it increased costs for those developers, and it makes the housing that can be developed not necessarily what the developers would like to develop and be most efficient and economical. So it reduces the number of units, and it also increases the cost for those units. Measure Z, if passed, will repeal Article 26 out of the charter, which would allow the city to zone for multifamily housing, including affordable rental housing on the island, and will help prevent displacement of low income and particularly communities of color, and repair a history of racial exclusion in Alameda. The history of the passage of this charter provision was extremely racist and classist, and it's time to get rid of this provision out of the city charter. You can get involved in the campaign by going to yesonmeasurez.com. I will be working on the campaign as a City of Alameda resident, as will Grover. If you have additional questions about this campaign in particular, please reach out to us. But yes on Measure Z, because it's about community.
Great, thank you to both our presenters. Before we take questions, just a couple of things. First, just one more thing on Measure Z. We are doing an Action Friday event next Friday, specifically on Measure Z. A link and some information about that has been posted in the chat, along with some other resources on Measure Z. So we hope many of you will be able to participate in that and help us get rid of this terrible legacy in Alameda. Also, just a note from Mariana on the last segment on the county measures, just correction on the dates for Ensuring Opportunities upcoming Voting for Equity virtual community meetings. The correct dates for those meetings are October 13th in English and October 14th in Spanish. Both of those will be from 5 to 6:30 p.m. And Ensuring Opportunity will send the invitation to EBHO, and then we will pass it along. So keep your eyes out for that. The other thing, just a note from Leah's presentation, just to clarify that ADUs are accessory dwelling units, also known sometimes as in-law apartments. So just want to make sure people understand what that was about. And let us see if we have any other questions. I see one just in the chat. Question regarding Measure Z. Is there any mechanism to encourage affordable multi-unit housing rather than condos?
Well, when the if Measure A is repealed and Measure Z is passed, it will make it much easier for affordable housing developers to build multi-unit, multi-family affordable housing on the island. Currently, the restrictions in Measure A in current law require a certain number of square feet of a unit, and so it limits the number of units, and so that's one reason why condos have been developed more than some other multifamily housing types. So repealing Measure A, passing Measure Z will make multifamily affordable housing much more possible, together with a community process to update the zoning in the city's general plan, which is also due to start in the next couple of years. So again, as we've talked about a number of these measures, the passage of Measure Z is not the last step, it's the first step, and it allows for more advocacy for the kinds of affordable housing that we want to see and that the community needs.
Great, thank you. And I will just add to that, Alameda also has an inclusionary zoning ordinance. So if condo buildings are constructed as market rate units, they will also have to include some percentage of affordable units as part of that development. I don't have the specific requirements at hand, but Alameda does have a inclusionary zoning ordinance. So I don't believe we have any further questions, but we'll take just a moment in case anybody has any. Please feel free to post those in the chat box. And not seeing any new questions, we will move on to the next portion. We want to shift gears now from what to vote on to how to vote, and some specific information on both how to register and how to vote. I think everybody knows there's been a lot of concern and controversy about how this election will fare. So this is particularly important information. So let me turn this over to Damion Scott, who will talk to us about how to register and vote. Damion.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff. Yeah, and as Jeff said, I'm going to be talking about how to register to vote and in general the election this year. So to first start with registration, the deadline to register is October 19th. That's statewide. But the day you should be registering, if you haven't already, is September 9th. The day you should be telling everyone else that you know who isn't registered to vote is to register today. The longer you wait to register, the higher increase the likelihood that you may not receive your ballot in the mail. If you wait till October 19th, you will not receive a ballot in the mail. Now, you can register and check your registration at registeredtovote.ca.gov. That's on the screen. And if you think that you already registered, today should also be a great time for you to check your registration and make sure everything is correct. If you don't have access to a computer, you can also call 1-800-345-VOTE, and that way you can get a paper registration form and you can fill that out. Now, also, if you're filling out a paper registration form, that registration form needs to be to your county registrar of voters by October 19th in order for you to be fully registered to vote. Now, the way I say fully registered to vote is because after October 19th, there's a little bit of, you won't get sort of the full ballot that looks the same as everyone else. You'll still be able to vote in your city or in your county. You still get all those, be able to vote for president, but the ballot will look a little different and it won't be counted until after the election so they know for sure that you're registered to vote, that everything is correct. So the county will have to, do some more work to verify your registration. But if you don't want to deal with any of that, just register before the 19th. We have the phone number and the websites for Alameda County Registrar of Voters and Contra Costa County Registrar of Voters. If you have any other questions about the election process, I would definitely use those resources because, of course, they know the most about the election process. Next slide, please. Now, most folks in the state will be voting by mail this year. Everyone who is already registered to vote before the 5th of October will receive a ballot in the mail. They will go out on October the 5th. That doesn't mean you'll receive it in your mailbox October the 5th. That means that's when they start to be mailed out. And for those who are worried they might not get their I voted sticker, don't worry. It will come in your ballot with your ballot in the mail, so you'll be able to wear that proudly. And if you're going to return it via the post office, via the mail, you must make sure it's postmarked by Election Day. So you have to make sure that you return it into the post office before the end of business on Election Day. If it's not postmarked on Election Day, it won't be counted. And as well, it has to be received by the county registrar by November 6th, also to be counted. Next slide, please. Now, the most secure way to return your mail-in ballot is by using a ballot return box. So these are these giant boxes. You probably see them around Alameda County, these huge boxes, and they're open 24 hours starting on October the 5th in Contra Costa County and Alameda County. They'll be open 24 hours, and you can return your ballot to the official drop boxes up until 8 p.m. on election night, which is November 3rd. After 8 p.m., it won't be counted, so you have to make sure it's in at 8 p.m., before 8 p.m. on election night. There are 66 in Alameda County, and more are being added. In Contra Costa County, there's currently 35. So far, only Alameda County's registrar voter website has a map of the drop boxes, but Contra Costa County, theirs will be available after October. Again, this is the most secure way to ensure that your mail-in ballot is returned into your county registrar of voters. Next slide, please. All right, now some folks might need to or might want to vote in person this year. Now, it's different, at least for Alameda County, voting in person is going to be different from previous years. Because in Alameda County, there won't be any regular polling places. There are only going to be 100 accessible voting centers. And these voting centers on election night will still be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., as well as there will be early voting starting on October 31st, but the early voting is only available 9 to 5 from October 31st to November 2nd. It's 9 to 5, but the voting center on election day is open 7 to 8. Now, this really should be used as a last resort for most folks. This really, you want to keep this for folks who are unhoused, for folks who wouldn't receive a ballot in the mail, or for folks who need more assistance in the voting process. So really, this should be your last resort voting at one of these vote centers. Now, for Contra Costa County, it's actually the same as it's always been. I don't know why that is the case, but it just, it's easier for you if you live in Contra Costa County. It's still based on your address, and you can find all that information at www.cocovote.us. Next slide, please. And now this is actually something new as well for this election. A lot of folks are sort of afraid of the post office and everything that's been happening to that. So actually in California, they've rolled out this feature called, Where's My Ballot, that lets you track your ballot as soon as the registrar of voters receives it in your county. And that's where'smyballot.sos.ca.gov. It's in the chat and on the screen. That's, you can use that tool in order to see if it's been accepted by your county, if it's been counted, or if it's been rejected. There are some few times where it's rejected, but you can use this service to make sure you're in the know of that. There's also a free service that the United States Postal Service provides called Informed Delivery. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Informed Delivery is really great because it lets you see all the mail that's been placed in your mailbox that day. And it's a great way so you can know if your ballot, when you receive your ballot, if it was supposed to be in your mailbox. maybe the informed delivery says it was, but you didn't receive it. So that's a free tool that the Postal Service actually has created that lets you see when all the mail is supposed to come. Next slide, please. All right, that's sort of my spiel about voting. There's some websites that just been placed on the screen: the registertovote.ca.gov and cocovote.us and acvote.org. Definitely want to use these resources so you can stay up to date on all the information about voting. I know it's a lot, but I think we're going to have some time for questioning after this. Maybe I can answer some of the questions you all have.
Great. Thank you, Damion. Very, very informative. I just want to add one note on informed delivery. It's a service I have actually used. You do need to sign up with the post office for that in advance, probably several days in advance before they implement it. What they actually do is scan the mail that's coming out from the post office before it goes to the mail carrier so that you can verify that what was delivered is actually what was put out there. If that's something you're interested in, you need to sign up in advance, and you have to have internet access because you'll be looking this up on the web. We do have a couple of questions, and then again, if you have questions, please post them in the chat. First question, can somebody go to the county clerk's office and pick up paper voter registration forms to distribute to other people and get more people registered to vote?
So yes, you can pick up voter registration forms, but I actually called Alameda County Registrar of Voters yesterday, and they let me know that there's a training for registering people to vote. It was unclear of whether or not the training is necessary before you pick up those paperwork, but I was told yesterday that Alameda County is providing trainings happening every Friday on how to register folks. There's actually a lot of sort of rules and regulations around doing a registration drive or things like that. So if you want to pick up paperwork for folks so that they can register to vote, I would definitely make sure to call your county registrar of voters first. Or if you do go there, just listen to what they have to say. So some things might be different this year.
Great, thank you, Damion. Next question. I read in an East Bay article that mail-in ballots must be received 17 days after Election Day, not 3 days. Can you confirm or not confirm that?
So that's information. So I think that's based off of information on the California Secretary of State website. It says that your ballot can be received by November 20th and it'll still be counted. I tried to call the Secretary of State, their office, to find out if this is true, if this was incorrect. I know we've been working with the League of Women Voters, and they give the date as November 6th. If it isn't received, they give the sort of the county date. I think that's the one that we're sticking with just to be safe. But we want to make sure that it's received on time. So if you do have to return it by on election night, then the post office really shouldn't be your option. You really should be returning it to a secure ballot drop box if you are going to do it on election night, because we don't know if that's a misprint by the state, but yeah, we want to definitely make sure we're doing it as early as possible.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, whether it's due 3 days or 17 days after Election Day, the deadline for getting it postmarked is still Election Day, so you have to make sure you get that ballot in the mail. And I'll just repeat what Damion has already said. The most secure way to return that ballot is to find one of the drop-off boxes and put it in the drop-off box, because it will then be picked up by the county directly without having to pass through the Postal Service. I do not think we have any further questions. Let me allow just a minute or two in case anybody has questions about any of the measures or information that we discussed today. And if not, then once again, thank you to all of our panelists for their excellent presentations and to people for their questions. And let me now turn it back over to Kiki Poe to close us out.
Okay, wow. How are we feeling after all of this information? I hope that you were taking notes. I know I was. We're going to get all of this information out to you. It was recorded. We were on Facebook Live. Want to thank everybody for being with us, our presenters, for preparing the information, our participants, for your questions, for just being here. I really want to echo what Gloria and Alyssa said about what our theme was today, right? Our theme was yes, and that these are the first steps. So we have much more work to do. We appreciate you being with us today to take those first steps. But please remember that this conversation can't stop here, right? We have a duty. We have a responsibility to take all of this information and pass it on, spread it out more widely. If you've learned anything today, right, please share that with your friends, your family, your networks. There's someone who probably isn't quite clear on a measure, who doesn't even know about it, and now you have all the tools to share that information and that knowledge so we can get them to vote yes. This is a part of what our work is. And so some action items, right, that we can do. So on the screen, you see that there's phone banking for Prop 15. You can support Measure W by going to the Home Together 2020 website or email Gloria. And of course, there have been so many links popped in there in the chat. Thank you so much, Grover. You're going to get an email with more information. Please stay tuned. And of course, we cannot continue to do this work without you. And we're doing the work. There's work to be done in all corners of Contra, Costa, Alameda counties, and we're determined to do it, our small but mighty staff. And so with you becoming a member helps us continue to get this work done. It takes money, like we know what that looks like. And so we want you to become a member, not just for the money, but your voice, your representation. This is how we get our work done. This is how we advocate for our communities. So I know that Grover's on top of it has probably already plugged in the link to become a member. If you have any questions about membership, please feel free to email me at kiki@ebho.org. Thank you again to everyone who's participated. We are stronger together. We know that. We get more done together. We know that. Please be gentle with yourselves. There's a lot going on in the world, and so we appreciate your commitment with us today. And with that, I say thank you so much.